It all started happening so fast. One body found after another. Our small station was scrambling to attend to each case, collecting evidence, finding connecting threads, and controlling the media circus while speaking with victims' families. Our town felt like it was set on fire overnight. Some bodies recovered, wrapped up a few missing persons cases we had ongoing, but none were missing for more than a month. It was hell, and naturally, the whole town started getting scared. There was never much of a criminal history here. Just a sleepy little town with primarily older folk. You know, mom and pop shops, somehow a Dollar General, and the church, real paltry affair. While trying to control the tide of panic, we worked quickly to try to get ahead on a killing spree we were already behind on. The first connecting thread, though, was clear as day. Out of the 7 bodies found, all of them had their eyes ripped from their sockets, as if someone had gone shopping for grapes. The caking crimson around their eyes faded quickly to darkness. Each body we discovered would stare back at us, pulling us a little deeper into that void. I had to see each of them. Whenever they connected a body to the case, they called me in to confirm. Another commonality was the Bibles. Now, our town is mighty religious. I'll admit that Sunday church is quite a communal event, but not everyone in town shares such beliefs, and that's fine, so long as you're not hurting anybody, believe or don't. In any case, each body would have a Bible lying nearby, though their families would swear they weren't the type to own one. It would seem old and quite used. Once white and pristine pages would be browned and aged like they were dug up from the soil. On the front of every Bible, written in fine handwriting, were the words, "Closer to God." Most victims seemed to struggle, but nothing substantial enough for us to get any reliable DNA samples from. Upon performing autopsies, we discovered that all the victims had rohypnol in their bodies. This implies that someone drugged all the victims to make them more manageable, and some victims caught on faster than others. So some victims would try to fight back, but ultimately fail in their impaired state. They attributed every victim's cause of death to a deep and ghastly wound on their right side. It is thought that the assailant would press a knife into their side and just keep forcing their way in. Interior lacerations suggest that he would sometimes get his whole fist inside and just wriggle the knife around. Suspected that was how he guaranteed the victim would die. Between the puncture and the drugs, the victim was powerless to fight back as he took their eyes. It received descriptions of being messy and barbaric. They observed small scratches on the interior of the eye sockets. These minor scratches were more consistent with the markings of fingernails as opposed to a knife, meaning this pervert jammed his fingers into their eyes and plucked the things out. And it wasn't clean. He struggled quite a bit, scratching the insides over and over. Sometimes the eye sockets started forming cracks. Obviously, you don't want any killers roaming around, but this one needed to be found and caught right away. Everything suggested a manic and uncontrollable state, but we didn't have leads. Despite the methods of killing and their personal beliefs, the victims had very little in common. My first thought was likely yours. I'm not saying this was the hardest case to crack, so I'm not trying to brag. If the whole thing hadn't thrown our station into chaos, it could have been any of us that made the connection. When I sat down in the church the Sunday after the first body was found, I could feel it. Everyone was uneasy, and my body looked around the pews as if I had never clocked out, eyeing everyone, sizing them up. Everyone was keeping it together, putting a face on. In the span of 2 weeks, investigators found all 7 bodies. The Sunday following the last body's discovery, being in that church made my skin crawl. A once haven started feeling like a bird cage. My skin was wriggling and my chest was tight. You never really know someone, and in that church, despite spending my whole life with them, all I saw was strangers. But I was looking in the wrong place. Well, that's not true. It was the right place, but the wrong perspective. While other officers led the investigation in different directions, I watched the church crowd, seeing if anyone seemed out of place. The words "out of place" stuck in my head. The letters tugged at my mind with strings, trying to get me to see something I wasn't seeing. Then it hit me. Out of place. Seeing something that I wasn't seeing? I got so caught up in trying to scan the churchgoers who were there that I had completely forgotten to consider the ones who weren't. Being the only church in town, you get a handle on. The regulars dang quick. And a few were missing from the lot. The first one I went after was a younger guy named Aaron. He was in his early 20s and a bit of a loner. The whole town would murmur about his constant struggles with alcohol, how he would drink his life away and go to church on Sunday, begging for God to magically turn things around for him. I thought maybe he was angry, maybe he thought God betrayed him. So he took it out on people, and, well, honestly, I didn't have a motive for the eye gouging, but it was still something. So I made my way to Aaron's residence and knocked on the door. When my fist met with the wood, it just swung open. The air inside, it immediately hung heavy with the foul traces of death. Little reapers drifting through the dust. My body heaved as the sickly air entered my lungs. Backup was quickly called, and I cautiously searched the house. As red and blue lights cascaded into the house, I stepped into his bedroom. I poised my gun and flashlight, with the flashlight's beam resting on the bed. I discovered that Aaron was our 8th victim. I gagged again, and my heart sank. I shouted that I found a body, and 2 officers swept the rest of the house. The scene was recent. I could tell by how glossy some of the blood around his wound was, trails of it still pouring out. Hot bile swished around in my stomach. I was a battery about to erupt. His body sprawled out on a bed that I initially thought had red covers, but his blood thinned from alcohol and spilled out like a river. He drenched the bed, soaking it down until the scarlet soaked into the wooden frame. It felt strange, seeing the Bible there, the page sitting open to familiar phrases. Closer to God. Under the phrase, though, was a name. A last message, written sloppily in blood, was offered by Aaron, whose fingertips were coated in red. Edgar. You'd think a town full of old folks would have a lot of Edgars walking around, but not ours. There was just one. Edgar Tarkins, an older gentleman who had been missing from church for a while. Before bodies started popping up, people would check on him. He'd say he was too tired to go to church, but that he would pray on his own. Eventually, people stopped asking as he became increasingly aggressive about the pestering. He would affirm that he was fine, but was too ill or tired to attend church. People would spot him limping around town still, though, so no one prodded too deep. It was starting to get late when Aaron was found. While I got a lot of pull in this town, there are still people who can boss me around, and one such person told me to go home and rest upon the discovery of Aaron, that I had already seen too much and been too close to the case. Eventually, I had to relent, despite my protest. I was told that other officers would go apprehend him and that I'd be called call when he thought I was ready. I was admittedly very exhausted. I had kept my eyes open for far too long. So, with the sun vanishing beyond the horizon, I sat at home, tried my best not to imagine the cops rolling up to Edgar's doorstep. My feet would pull me from one room to the other, burning trails into the carpet. I was meant to be relaxing, but there was this tightness in my chest. Like I was waiting for my parents to discover something bad I had done. I just couldn't shake it. So, I reached into the fridge and, against better judgment, I grabbed a beer. My fingers laced around the cap, and with a twist, I pulled it free from the bottle. Raising the bottle to my lips, I felt the cool glasses resting, inviting me to take my first sip. My hand hung there for a moment, teasing my mouth with the essence of the drink. In the back of my head, a bothersome feeling nagged at me, subconscious screaming at me to notice. And I did, upon pulling the bottle away from my mouth. I looked at the beer's label, and I wondered, were these always twist-off caps? My fingers grazed around the mouth of the bottle, and sure enough, there were no ridges that would allow you to just twist the cap off. I'm not a weak guy, but I wouldn't be able to pop it off like that without a little force, which meant... Before I could even finish my thought, I heard something slapping against the kitchen floor. A rapid pattering of bare feet smacked the chilled tile. Turning towards the sound, I barely glimpsed him as he slammed into me. Since I was so surprised, we were both thrown back and tumbled to the ground. My head spun as it smacked against the floor. My limbs moved around, trying to get a hold of the man who had tackled me. Vision had gone to static after the hit, and while it was slowly coming back, I was fighting effectively blind. As we wrestled for control, I kept thinking that it couldn't be Edgar. I'm not a weak man, but the person assaulting me. I could feel them overpowering me. If I wasn't desperate, adrenaline pumping through my veins, I would have lost the fight. Heart furiously pumping the blood I needed to survive, I fought back as best as I could, trying to get my bearings. I'd grab his wrist and forearms, trying my best to get a solid grasp. Even in the struggle, I knew it was wrong, the way his skin felt. In some areas, his skin felt like aged leather, particularly around the strange bumps I kept encountering. Squishy and bulbous protrusions on his skin, like giant warts ready to pop.
And if thy right eye offends thee?
The man on top of me growled. His voice shot out through gritted teeth, like an animal trying to ward me away. My vision was becoming clearer. We were both illuminated by the still-open refrigerator. The soft yellow light reflected off the red blotches all over his body. I'm not sure if my vision was still blurry, or if I just couldn't wrap my head around what I was looking at. It was a nightmare, the whole thing. With my senses coming together, I could affirm that it was indeed Edgar attacking me. The old man in his frail frame made me look like a child, mager.
Pluck it out and cast it from thee.
He dragged on his words like a cigarette, like the malic fill his lungs. His arms pushed down. I realized he was fighting his way to my face. He was trying to get to my damn eyes. I fought and fought, shouted at him, anything I could. Still, it was strange. Where was the knife? He had gored out his other victims. Why hadn't he stabbed me when he jumped at me? I searched his waist to see if he had the weapon on him. That's when I caught a solid sight of him. My vision no longer altered and my mind was in fight or flight. I saw what he had done to himself. It was almost enough to make me drop my arms like life had dripped from my body.
For it is profitable for thee.
His voice got louder, almost rattling my brain, the words growling like a bear. Drifting my gaze up along his naked torso, everything came into focus in the most horrid of fashions. Sick and festering patches of skin covered his body. His aged flesh had turned purple and putrid with a yellow foam dripping down, mixing with dark reds. These wounds weren't the worst part, though. He had caused large cuts on himself, which led to the decaying patches of skin in those areas. And in those cuts, Christ. When I looked at the cuts, I could see them staring back at me. The flesh had ridges and was pried open enough for me to see the eyeballs he had shoved into the wounds, looking back at me. I could feel my body convulsing as I tried to gather my strength. All 19 eyes had a home, the freshest of which was Aaron's. Blood caked the flesh surrounding the eyeballs, giving the appearance that they were all crying.
That one of thy members should perish.
His hot saliva smattered onto my face as I could feel his fingertips teasing the edges of my eye socket. Fighting him like that would not work. He'd overpower me. I don't know how. Hell, looking at his body, it was a miracle he was moving at all. But I had to take a risk. Slipping my left hand away, I continued to struggle with the right, with all the strength I could muster. My free hand frantically searched the floor around me. I couldn't quite reach the contents of the fridge, but I knew at least one thing should be near me still. It got harder to fight back as I felt his digits start to plunge. They pried my eyelids apart, and I could feel the sticky and grating texture of his fingers. I could feel down to the intricate detail where all his fingernails had chipped, leaving them jagged and cruel. My free arm reached back. I was losing the battle quickly. Each millimeter I lost made the sensation around my eye grow.
And not that thy whole body.
He pressed his fingers in, causing my vision to blur and my face to feel like a hot poker was being pressed into it. I must have been howling like a beast. I could feel my teeth gnashing together and my body writhing around. The pain became everything. All other senses dulled. I couldn't taste the filth that had dripped into my mouth. I couldn't hear our bodies fighting, just searing agony. A high-pitch, wire-pulled taut pain. I was begging, not out loud anymore. I wanted anything to save me. The feeling of, this is really how it ends, washed over me. Thoughts going vacant. Those jagged fingernails dug around, pushing my eye around in its socket. Like a cat at the bathroom door, I heard his fingernails scratching against the bone. And one vicious and earth-splintering yank, my right field of vision turned off. He sat up, straddled me like a show pony, and observed the state of his prize. I was looking at my own desecrated eye. His hand twisted around so he could look at it from every angle. My body was growing weak, but I could see them. They were very faint, the hint of blue and red flashing on my walls.
"I should be cast into hell."
He finished, his voice calmer, and spoke in an almost mocking tone, like he knew something I didn't. He grinned, the skin around his actual eyes wrinkled up. He looked like a demon, an unfathomable creation, an abomination. He must have noticed the lights too, increasing in intensity. He quickly bent over and lunged for my remaining eye. His hand got so close, but before those fingertips made contact, using what remaining strength I had, and beamed the side of his head with the beer bottle. An empty thunk rang out as his body crumbled to the side for a moment. I thought he was about to fall over, but then he stopped himself and laughed. The lights at this point were wrapping around us. The blood on his body momentarily vanished when red flooded the room, only to return in the blue light. With that, he backed off and stood. Between the hit to my head, the gouging of my eye, and the effort spent trying to stop it, I had nothing left in the tank. It was taking so much to not fall asleep. Instead, I stared at the madman standing above me, looking down at me with admiration, a softness in his eyes that was shared with the eyes that he had pressed into himself. They all looked down at me. He made me feel like a child in strength and mind. He held his trophy up and gazed into the eye he had taken from me.
"What good is an angel with no witness?"
He says aloud, a question that only sought an answer from himself. I was still getting used to the loss of vision, but when he retreated, it looked like he was so swift. His body almost became as he ran through the glass sliding door leading to the backyard. There was some brief shouting from the officers outside. A few of them got a shot off. Then they rushed through the door and spotted me. They lifted my body and carried me to the squad car. The hospital was close. By turning their lights on, they would get there faster than waiting for an ambulance. I told them everything I could at the moment, and then further details when I had pulled myself together. They looked at me like I had lost my mind. They believed me eventually. There were a few reported sightings from my neighbors that night to confirm what I had seen. My recovery took place at another officer's house. A close friend. None of us thought it was wise I returned home for a while, in case he wanted my other eye. While recovering, the department looked high and low for Edgar, but he must have gotten out of town. They informed me that his house was mostly empty. There were Bibles in every room, drawings of angels, all taking various forms. I can only guess his motives and what he has planned. Whenever I think about the attack, I can swear the eyes on his body kept their attention on me. The wounds were so festered and gross, I didn't think trying to agitate them would have helped me. I know now that it might have. Edgar's plans. What he's doing, it's working. One morning, I woke up and I had restored vision in my right eye. I sat up in bed and stared at the wall, trying to comprehend how I could have two different scenes in front of me. One was the warmly lit bedroom, the sun drifting through the windows catching spare specks of dust. The other eye, though, was in some deep and dingy basement. It had all the color washed out of it. Pages covered the floor, and mold clung to the walls like peel and stick tile. In the middle of the room was a mirror, one that my right eye got closer and closer to. By covering my left eye, I could focus on that environment better. It was like I could choose not to be in the bedroom. My right eye, though, I can't close it. It's always open, always watching. And as it got closer to the mirror, that's all I could do was watch. Watch as Edgar stepped in front of it. I could see where he had placed my eye. It was in his side, the same spot he had stabbed the others to kill them. Edgar had been busy. Panic caused me to grip the surrounding bedsheets. Eyes also covered his legs, and his skin was bumpy and ill all over. He was a collection of shades, greens, purples, reds, and yellow. His body was dying in 100 different ways, and yet, he stood tall and in that dark room. He had a radiant glow. I mean, a literal glow. The intensity of his brightness was sufficient to light up the room. Something nestled in my thoughts when I saw that glow. Despite all the sermons I had attended, all the times I've hunched over on my knees and prayed, all my volunteering, the handful of lives I've saved, my whole life, devoted to the church and my love for the people in this town. Despite all of it, looking at him, I felt closer to God. A huge thanks to you/AuthorJoJo for writing such a terrifying story. Be sure to check out the original post in the description below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Eternal Dread for more spine-chilling content. Thanks for watching.